this current point, and that is of course involving the electronic and gaming company Sony. Yes, after 7 whole years of not having a new console out, they have finally given us quite a bit of information on their next home video game console, the PlayStation 5. And lots of people have already made a couple of videos on it, and as I've said before, if you saw my video of me talking about Dark Souls 3, I actually managed to get myself a PS4. So I wanted to go ahead and make this video to give out my overall opinions on the system itself and what I feel about it overall, since this is actually my first actual PlayStation console. So the first major thing that I would like to talk about is actually the thing that I'm holding right at this very moment, the PS4 controller. Now, Sony has done this sort of thing where they basically are the definition of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, because if you take a look at all of their controllers all in a row, especially compared to other gaming companies like Nintendo or Microsoft, these controllers don't really change all that much in terms of overall design. They always have the traditional shapes as the face buttons, the analog sticks being on the bottom of the controller rather than the left one being on the top. Of course, the way the D-pad is shaped, where all of them look like they're separate buttons, even though if technically it is still part of one main shape, it's just that you can't really see the middle connecting it all together. But overall, I actually really do like the feeling of these type of controllers. It's a lot more rectangular, as you can no doubt see, especially compared to controllers like well, I would usually compare it to something like the Xbox 360 controller, because the 360 is one of the other main consoles that I used to play a whole lot of. And as a result of that, I'm very used to the overall shape of their controller. And I was actually quite surprised how comfortable it was overall. The main thing that I was sort of concerned about was the fact that I'm not used to having systems where both the analog sticks are on the bottom of the controller, because I'm always used to having my thumb on this part of the controller here, because this is usually where the left stick actually is. But I actually got used to it rather quickly. And considering the fact that you're sort of moving your thumbs around the controller a lot most of the time, it's something that I eventually got used to, and in some ways I almost find it a bit more comfortable compared to the other controllers. And if you went ahead and looked at a few of the things that they revealed about the PS5, the controller definitely looks a lot more chunkier than any of their other controllers. It definitely looks like more similar to the controllers that Microsoft usually come out with, like with the 360 or the Xbox One, as a much more of a rounded design compared to the more rectangular sort of design. And that does sort of disappoint me, but then again, the system isn't technically out yet, so we're not quite sure how that's going to overall feel, especially compared to these ones. But so far, I really do actually like this controller. And the other thing that I really enjoy about the PS4 itself is how simple it is to set up in terms of the overall interface. The interface is definitely really clean. There's not too much stuff that's really cluttered up. Again, I compare it to something like the 360, where there's a whole bunch of different options and different screens that they use for stuff like news, upcoming games, and all that kind of stuff, which I'm pretty sure a majority of the people who have a 360 don't even look at the majority of those things, because when you're playing a gaming console, the main thing that you're looking for is being able to actually play the games, unless you're looking for something, say, on the Microsoft Store to buy a game or DLC digitally. So, and also those who use it as a DVD player or like an internet browser and all that kind of stuff. It can definitely feel sort of cluttered, and as a result I barely use any of the options if it doesn't involve me actually playing the game. But for the PS4, the interface is definitely, like I said, a lot more cleaner. And I actually think that Nintendo actually took a bit of notes when it comes to that, because with the release of the Nintendo Switch, they made an interface that was actually very similar to the likes of the PS4, where you see all the games that you currently have data for in your system, the a majority of the other sort of options are all on the top half of the screen, and then the bottom half of the screen is where you have all the news about games and like stuff for like achievements or trophies as they're called on the PS4. But it just feels a lot more cleaner. It doesn't feel like they tried to put so much stuff into one thing to the point where it looks like none of a majority of stuff isn't going to be used. Granted, I do still primarily for the games, but doing stuff like accessing the PlayStation Store to see what kind of games they have, that's very easy to do. Redeeming codes is very easy to do. You don't have to go through so many like hoops in order to actually get the points on your profile. It's just very easy to set up, and I hope that the with the release of the PS5 they make sure to take notes on how well done the system interface was made and make something that's very similar to it, but also possibly make it a bit more cleaner. Not to say completely restart it from the ground up, but make it something that is, one, easy to move around, and also something that doesn't seem like it's just rehashing the same things that the PS4 did. So, yeah, like I said, the controller, I'm really surprised on how much I enjoyed it. The interface is definitely really good, but I do have a couple of gripes. And a lot of them are sort of nitpicks that I have, but one thing that I do found a bit jarring at first is the way you actually turn off the system. Now, a majority of consoles released nowadays, they're sort of built with the intention of the player keeping the system plugged in, and as a result, they have things like the PS4 having rest mode, which you use by just hitting the power button. We also have the Nintendo Switch having its own sleep mode. As for the Xbox One, I'm not quite sure about that, considering I don't have any experience with that console, but I reckon it has something very similar to that. But as a result of that, the way you actually turn off the system is actually by going to an entirely separate option and hitting a button that actually makes it so that it actually turns off. And while it doesn't really isn't really that big of a problem, it did feel kind of jarring in the fact that if you ever unplug it while it's like in its rest mode, you get this notification saying, telling you to not actually do that. It just feels kind of weird. It's like they're trying to make things a bit more like simple for people, because most of the time when people are gaming, they're usually like on a couch or sitting down on their bed, and they're just trying to relax and play the game, and it would make sense for be able to not have to press the power button to actually turn off the system. But for people who are used to the older consoles, if you wanted to turn the system off, all you had to do was hit the power button and it would just immediately turn off. But so at the same time they're trying to make things more simple, but at the same time they're trying to make things more complicated, if that makes any sense. And like I said, it's something that I eventually got used to, but it was just something that felt a bit jarring at first. So, yeah, overall, one other thing that I think is sort of, it's not necessarily a negative towards the PS4 itself, but the fact that there were, multiple versions of the PS4 that were made, the PS4, the PS4 Pro, and the PS4 Slim, I believe it was called. I'm sorry if I'm getting that name wrong, but this idea of releasing a console but then releasing a newer version of the console, it just seems like with very few features added to it, it feels like that's sort of like a sort of quick cash grab. It's like the same thing that when companies like Capcom release something like Street Fighter, and then they release a newer version of it that just adds a bit more extra content. Then they add another version, and then another, and then another, and then another, with and you completely forget the fact that this was all originally part of just one game. But they eventually made so many different versions that renders all the previous ones completely obsolete. But unlike those, if you're basically not getting very much in terms of differences when buying a PS4 to say a PS4 Pro. Like for example, yeah, it does technically store. It does have a bit more data into it, and games will run slightly better. And it also has, it's for stuff like people who have 4K televisions and all that. And the PS4 Slim, is a lot quieter. It's a lot more, like I said, slim, and it's a lot more of a compact design. But in terms of, you know, differentiating itself from the other systems, it doesn't really do a whole lot. It's similar to, stuff like the original 360, then the 360 Slim, and then the 360 Super Slim. At the same time, they're trying to make it better, but they also had a lot of the same overall features, and it seemed like they were making things a lot more. It just felt like it was more and more of a quick, like, sort of cash grab. You release one system, but instead of trying to put all the great features into this, you decide to release another one, that adds very few things and like sort of makes it slightly smaller. They shouldn't do something like what they did was, like, say, Nintendo with the Wii, where each version got worse and worse with, the fact that they got rid of the GameCube compatibility, the different ports that it had, and with the Wii Mini's case, it didn't even have any sort of internet compatibility, which made it ultimately kind of worthless, except for the fact that it was cheaper. Don't do something like that, but if you're going to re-release a new version of the system, make it so that, we have more of an incentive to buy that as when the systems get older and older, because I got myself a regular PS4, and I've had absolutely no problem with it, and I don't feel the need to really upgrade it to what is considered a better version of the system, when in actuality, it's more of just the same, but with a slightly different shape. Another thing that I found sort of, in a way, kind of ridiculous is the fact that the PS4 isn't backwards compatible with the PS3 games or any of the older systems that Sony had, which, it may seem like it sort of makes sense, but if you think back to, say, the PS2 and, the PS3, a lot of the times you would be able to actually have the, previous games from the PS1 or PS2 compatible with that same exact system, which is good for people who want to save up more space. But not only did they start getting rid of the backwards compatibility as new versions of the system came out, but with the PS4 you aren't able to. It isn't backwards compatible with any of the previous PlayStation games at all, and instead, they created with the PlayStation Plus subscription service, you can pay a fee to have these older games playable on, your main system, which I feel is kind of just getting more of people's money. I mean, they have these older games that they're now forced to play on inferior hardware, while they could, just have so that it's either backwards compatible with the original games, or make these games, downloadable through the PlayStation Store, like with the PS3, PS2, and PS1 games, of course. And while the PS5 is said to be backwards compatible with all the PS4 games, I do hope that they still keep the older games compatible either digitally, through the PlayStation Store, so that people have a reason to go back to these older games, because, the original, all the previous PlayStation systems did have a fantastic library. It was a reason why it was it basically became Nintendo's second main competitor, aside from Microsoft, but, I just feel like it should be able to keep the legacy that it had. But overall, I am still very glad that I got myself a PS4, and if you don't have one yourself, I do think that if you don't want to wait for the PS5 to eventually come out, I do think you're very good to go with getting the system, especially nowadays, since it's nowhere near as expensive as it was when it first released. So, overall, yeah, that's about all the time that I have for this video. I hope you all really enjoyed this. I actually had a lot of fun talking about this system. I've been wanting to make this type of video for quite a while now. And until I see you all next time, I'm Ben Contreras, and bye.